On December 16, 2000, Jerry Michael Williams went hunting at Lake Seminole, and he never returned home. During this period, his wife, Denise Williams, kept calling Michael, but no one answered, so Denise called the police. The police searched around the lake for several days, but they still found no trace of Michael. The day of the incident was the 6th anniversary of Michael and Denise's marriage. Denise had prepared a big meal to celebrate the wedding anniversary, but Michael didn't come home and his phone remained unanswered. At first, Denise thought her husband was just too focused on hunting to notice. But as it was almost evening and she still couldn't get in touch with Michael, she remembered that her husband had said he would go hunting with his friend Brian Winchester. So she contacted Brian, but Brian said he didn't go today because it was Michael's wedding anniversary and he didn't want to disturb. With no other options until nightfall, Denise chose to call the police. After receiving the report, the police went to Lake Seminole, where Michael hunted. After searching, they found Michael's car and a small boat floating in the lake. The hunting tools on the boat proved that it was the one Michael used for hunting. Therefore, the police judged that Michael must have encountered an emergency during the hunt, and he accidentally fell into the lake and drowned. So the police dispatched a salvage team to search for the body in the lake, but after several days they found nothing. The police guessed that Michael's body might have been eaten by crocodiles or some carnivorous fish. But it was just a guess because there was no substantive evidence. Half a year later, there was still no progress in the Michael disappearance case. Just when everyone thought that Michael's disappearance had become an unsolved case, new evidence emerged. In June 2001, a person was fishing at Lake Seminole when he found a piece of clothing floating on the lake. Suspecting someone had fallen into the water, he called the police. After the police arrived at the scene, they immediately conducted a search and finally found a jacket with Michael's hunting license inside. So the police characterized Michael's disappearance case as an accidental death. After the case was characterized, Michael's wife Denise applied to the court to request that the court declare the fact of Michael's death. Soon the court pronounced Michael's death based on this evidence. After the court's ruling, Denise claimed a $1.5 million insurance payout from the insurance company, and the Michael disappearance case was closed. But Michael's mother, Cheryl Williams, always refused to accept this result. She felt that Michael couldn't have drowned. There must be something else behind his death, because Michael learned to swim at a very young age. Even if he drowned due to being entangled by aquatic plants, the body should still be in the original position. And she looked at Michael's belongings. Except for being soaked in water, there were no bite marks. It was impossible for crocodiles or some carnivorous fish to have eaten Michael's body. The most crucial point was that when Michael first disappeared, the police didn't find the belongings. But they were suddenly discovered half a year later. Cheryl told the police about her doubts. In fact, the police also had the same doubts. So they restarted the investigation and explored in the direction of murder. After the investigation, they found that Michael's social circle was not complicated. He had no enemies. Besides his wife, daughter, and mother, the only other close person was Brian. Cheryl was not present on the day of the incident. After the police investigation, they found that Denise and Brian were good friends with Michael since their student days. Denise was also Michael's first love. Even after marriage, their relationship remained unchanged. They even had a daughter more than a year before Michael's disappearance. After having a daughter, Denise became a full-time housewife. Michael worked hard to support the family. The family of 3 was enviably happy. Brian also had his own family. As Michael's friend for many years, he would often come to Michael's house to visit him. After the investigation, the police believed that neither Denise nor Brian had a motive for murder. So they gave up investigating the case. But Michael's mother, Cheryl, did not give up. She often went to the police station to inquire about the case. Over time, the police also became impatient and perfunctory every time. 3 years after Michael's disappearance, Brian divorced his wife Casey. 2 years after their divorce, Denise and Brian fell in love and entered the marriage hall. It was like two sad people saving each other. They started a new life. Michael was born in Florida, USA. He also had an older brother. Although the family was somewhat poor, they lived a happy life. Michael learned to hunt to support the family when he was young, and later developed the habit. Even when he didn't need the money, he would go hunting every day. And Michael was sincere, hardworking, and excellent in his studies. He was very popular with teachers and classmates at school. After graduating from high school, he was admitted to Florida State University. With outstanding grades, he could get scholarships every time. After graduation, he became an asset appraiser. With excellent work performance, he was promoted continuously, and his life gradually improved. Just like most people, Michael got married and had a lovely daughter. Cheryl thought her son would live a happy life. But an accident came suddenly. She vowed to find the truth about her son's death. Cheryl wrote to the governor. In the letter, she detailed the details and doubts of the case, saying that she was alone and helpless and hoped the governor could send someone to reopen the case. However, she wrote hundreds of letters but received no response. Then Cheryl began to promote in the community. She continuously published missing person ads in the local newspaper and set up information boards on the street, pasting Michael's photos and detailed information on the day of his disappearance. She stood beside the board herself and told passersby Michael's story, trying to arouse public interest and sympathy. In addition, Cheryl even contacted some private detectives and missing person experts to share the case materials and seek their opinions and help. However, despite Cheryl's unremitting efforts, the biggest problem she faced was the lack of new clues or evidence. Especially in the absence of new evidence, Cheryl's actions were deadlocked. In 2016, it had been exactly 16 years since Michael's death. For most people, this memory had gradually faded and was even filled with new life. This year, Cheryl was on the verge of despair. However, just when she thought there was no hope, a new clue suddenly emerged, bringing a glimmer of hope. This clue came from Denise and Brian's divorce case. Denise overturned her previous statement. It turned out that Michael's death was actually planned by Denise and Brian together. The previous police investigation was not wrong. During their student days, Denise and Brian were indeed good friends with Michael. But Denise and Brian also had a short relationship. However, their relationship didn't last long and almost no one knew about it. After Michael graduated from college, he made a lot of money at work and married Denise as he wished. Their life was plain but happy. Brian also got together with a girl named Casey and got married. Once, Brian went to Michael's house to look for him. But Michael hadn't come home from work yet. There was only Denise at home. Brian and Denise were alone in the room. Because they were once lovers, as the atmosphere became increasingly ambiguous, they did something immoral. After that, they maintained a secret relationship. Out of guilt, Denise tried her best to play the role of a gentle and virtuous housewife. The deceived Michael just thought Denise was too gentle. As time passed, Denise was dazzled by Brian's sweet talk. Brian was not satisfied with the underground relationship and wanted Denise to marry him, even threatening her. Denise couldn't resist Brian's coaxing and threats, but she didn't want to give up her comfortable life. Moreover, marital infidelity would be looked down upon. So a vicious plan was hatched secretly. The initial plan was that Denise suggested that Brian and she kill both Michael and Brian's wife Casey, so that they could be together freely without any moral or legal constraints. However, Brian didn't want to kill Casey, so they finally decided to target Michael. A few days before Michael's death, Denise took a crucial step to ensure her financial interests. She contacted Brian, who used his position as an insurance agent, to buy a large life insurance policy for Michael. During this process, Brian ensured that all documents were legally correct, to avoid any future legal disputes or investigations. They chose an insurance plan that included a high accidental death compensation, The insurance policy was processed and approved quickly. Everything seemed reasonable because there was no sign of premeditation. Michael knew nothing about this, and Denise pretended to care about her husband. After buying the insurance, Denise and Brian began to plan how to cause Michael's accidental death. Brian learned from Denise that Michael would go hunting at Lake Seminole every day. So during a meal, he casually said that he had recently developed an interest in fishing and wanted to go fishing with Michael. Since Michael went hunting at Lake Seminole every day, he agreed to the request. On the day of Michael and Denise's wedding anniversary, Brian and Michael met at Lake Seminole. They arrived very early and there was no one around. Brian said he wanted to experience being on Michael's hunting boat. Michael didn't refuse. When Michael was concentrating on hunting, Brian suddenly grabbed the gun and pushed Michael into the lake. Michael struggled desperately, looking at his crazy friend in disbelief, and then turned to swim ashore. But Brian shot Michael in the head and he died on the spot. After killing Michael, Brian was afraid of being discovered, so he pulled Michael's body ashore, found another hidden place to bury it, and waited until the blood was washed away by the lake at night. That's why the police found no clues or belongings at that time. But because there were no clues, the police judged that Michael was just missing. But if he was just missing, Denise couldn't get the insurance compensation. So a few months later, Brian quietly threw Michael's belongings onto the lake. Then the court pronounced Michael's death based on the police report. After conducting the necessary investigation and review, the insurance company confirmed the death situation. Denise finally received a total compensation of $1.5 million. After that, Denise and Brian didn't get together immediately. After all, Brian still had his own family. Also because Cheryl believed that Michael was killed and never gave up investigating the truth. The guilty Denise and Brian decided to wait for some time before being together. During that time, Denise was always worried that the police would find some crucial evidence. So she often called to ask about the progress of the case. The police only thought it was because of the deep love between the husband and wife, which instead reduced Denise's suspicion. A few years later, Brian divorced his wife Casey, who was also happy because Brian was not good to her. He was idle all day and often beat and scolded her. She had long wanted to end the marriage but was afraid that Brian would go crazy and hit her. So she never dared to raise the request. 2 years later, Michael had been dead for 5 years. When almost everyone had almost forgotten about it, Denise married Brian with her daughter and inheritance. After marriage, they lived in the house bought by Michael. Denise broke down in tears. Looking disheveled, she appeared extremely embarrassed. Because more than 10 years had passed, their money was running out. Because they only spent but didn't earn. The conflicts were also increasing. Brian was no longer as kind and attentive to Denise as when they first got together. Denise was dissatisfied and began to complain about Brian. Brian also lost his patience and hit Denise after an argument. Domestic violence happens once and will occur countless times. Over the years, Brian often beat and scolded Denise. Eventually, Denise, like Casey, became Brian's punching bag. When Brian hit her, he never avoided her and Michael's daughter. Every time Denise was beaten, her daughter could only cry, and sometimes was beaten by Brian as well. When Michael and Denise's daughter was nearly 18 years old, she advised her mother to leave Brian, but Denise would rather be beaten and refused. She didn't understand why. Every time she asked her mother, she would be evaded and forbidden to spread it. Denise also thought about leaving Brian, but she found that Brian was a lunatic. Every time she mentioned breaking up, he would hit her and lock her up. Brian was also afraid that the incident from the past would be exposed. After all, he killed Michael. Later, Brian's domestic violence became more and more serious. The daughter tearfully persuaded Denise to leave this bad man. Otherwise, they would be killed by him sooner or later. Under the double torture of psychology and body, Denise finally couldn't stand it anymore and insisted on divorcing Brian. Who knew that Brian actually wanted to kill her like he killed Michael back then? Seeing Brian's fierce expression, she realized that he was serious. Denise felt unprecedented fear. She could only swear that she would never mention breaking up again. When Brian let his guard down, Denise secretly ran out and called the police. After running to the police station, Denise told the police all the details of Brian's intention to kill her and Michael's murder 16 years ago. Michael's mother, Cheryl, couldn't control her trembling after hearing this. She really wanted to strangle Denise immediately. Denise also regretted it deeply. After being with Brian, she realized how good Michael was to her. Then the police quickly arrested both of them and found Michael's body. In court, Denise confessed to conspiring with Brian to kill Michael. Brian had no way to deny it either. In the end, Denise was sentenced to 30 years in prison and Brian was sentenced to death. After hearing the verdict, Cheryl walked out of the court. She felt extremely relieved and at the same time extremely lonely. Because no matter how the verdict was, Michael could never come back to her side.